Geordie, dude.
Yeah.
Thank goodness that you're here to fill me in on what's been happening over the last couple of weeks leading up to the election, man. Because, look, like all self-respecting Aussies, I've spent the last week essentially in hibernation in between the Easter long weekend with all our public holidays and the Anzac Day long weekend.
Yeah.
I've essentially been in just a state of slumber. So I have woken from my slumber and I've, opened up the window, looked outside and fuck me dead. The election's coming up next week.
It certainly is. I wouldn't forgive you if you forgot.
Yeah.
I would not forgive you whatsoever. In between the long weekends and Anzac Day and the Pope passing away last week.
Exactly, and it's kind of been a little bit of a lull. But, the election's next week, mate.
Correct. May the 3rd.
May the 3rd.
Missed opportunity. Could and should have been May the 4th.
Yeah, May
but
the 4th.
It had a Star Wars themed federal election. That could have been fun.
Or even May the 8th.
Or May the 8th. And Mate,
I will still opt that should be the next Australia Day. We should change the name. The date, sorry. So pretty much I've been clocked out of the Australian news media since Peter Dutton kicked a football into that cameraman about a week and a half ago.
I think he was clocked out too.
So look, I've pretty much been out of the loop. So what's been happening, mate? What can you tell me about some recent developments? What's important?
So there has been a few really interesting kind of developments.
Yeah.
A couple of key incidences that I'd like to talk about. Mm-hmm. Most importantly, on the two-party preferred, mm-hmm. which takes into account all the primary votes and preferences. Labor has pulled ahead in the past 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. This is significant because the coalition was leading for the last 3 months, pretty much since the start of the year. Mm-hmm. So Labor have now swung ahead with a 50 to 53% lead, and the coalition trailing at about 46 to 50%.
And this is like pretty consistent across kind of most polls. We're finding it's reflecting like a pretty similar kind of divide.
This is obviously a poll that tries to put forward who's going to gain majority to govern.
Yeah.
Coalition have been kind of leading, and this takes into account, as I said, all the preference voting. It's here in Australia.
Yeah.
We have preferential voting. We don't have first past the post.
Yeah.
So it's not about who gets the most votes. It's who can get a majority, including the preference system.
Yes.
I won't go into the details of that. It's not that complicated, just so people know. It's a little bit different to, for example, what the United States and the United Kingdom have.
Of course, yeah. And obviously polling is kind of... The idea is that it gives you like a rough indicator of the general outlook. It's obviously not an exact science and it's not going to be an exact prediction.
Correct.
So
and
we will find out on the day, of course.
Yeah, you can't take into account people that on the day decide who they're going to vote for.
Yeah.
Or protest votes.
Yeah.
I guess, or just you can't really just reduce it down to a perfect mathematical equation.
No, of course. And there is like a fair number of people who essentially go into a polling booth and just like draw a picture of a penis on the card.
That is also
and just send
a
it in and just say, I hate you both and screw the system, essentially.
And hey, that's your vote.
Yeah, good on you. And that's using your democratic right.
That's exactly right. So what I found interesting, though, is I was looking at some of the statistics from the 2022 election. Mm-hmm. Notably, there has been a 4% drop in primary votes for both the major parties. Mm-hmm. There are now more young people than ever voting in the federal election.
Yep.
And there is now more people voting for independents and minor parties.
For example, like the Greens.
One Nation. Our favourite Trumpeter Patriots.
Yeah, Trumpeter Patriots.
So some of those minor parties and also some of the minor parties in the Senate.
I'm actually predicting a Trumpeter Patriots majority victory. That's big facetious. I apologise.
Yeah, so there's definitely been a 4% drop in the primary votes. Labor's now pulled ahead. However, look, the looking at these statistics, looking at the polls is one way. I think you get a rough idea of the mood of what's going on. Mm-hmm. And I think in the past fortnight, 3 weeks now, there's been a shift away from Dutton. Yeah. There's been a few instances where he has kind of stumbled. He's sort of tried to come across as being the hard, responsible man the entire time. And it's just not gelling with Australians.
Yeah, and so he doesn't really have any actually concrete policies that he's put down, has he?
Oh, he's had a couple that he
hasn't retracted?
No, so I'll talk about this. However, you can look at the polls, the two-party preferred. I think it's a good way of getting an overall idea of what could be happening. However, I think there's a more valid, a better way of, should I say, getting an insight. Yeah. And that's going to sportsbet.com.
Ah, of course, yeah.
So I think Sportsbet is really good. because it gives you honestly, not for betting, but for looking if you want to
Odds tracking.
Odds tracking.
Yeah.
And like, let's be honest, if you want to get your news about Australian politics, go to sportsbet.com.
Of course.
If you want to put some money on the dogs or the horses, go to sportsbet.com. Why not do both at the same time? So Sportsbet currently is paying $1.15 for a Labor Prime Minister and $6 for a Coalition Prime Minister.
Ooh.
And notably $151 for any other result.
150. So if I do put all my savings into Clive Palmer winning, and he does win, which he will, because how could he not?
Yeah.
Then I'm going to be a very wealthy man.
You're going to be a very wealthy man.
Yeah.
I know that Clive Palmer isn't running though.
Or Clive Palmer's party.
Clive Palmer's party. Should remember that.
Clive Palmer.
Yeah.
Oh, look, that shows how little interest I pay to his party. But continue. Yeah.
So, yeah, it does look like Labor is most likely going to win next weekend. However, I don't know, $6 odds on the Coalition. Might have to go put $20 on that. It's not too bad.
Well, that's it. 'Cause then even if the Coalition win and you watch Dreams for a Better Australia crumble, at least you've won a bit of cash.
That's exactly
so
right.
So it kind of soothes the burn a little bit, shall we say.
Correct, yeah. What was interesting, though, talking about Dutton having no policies, last week he did come out just before Anzac Day and announce an extra $20 billion into defence spending.
Ah, of course.
The timing was perfect.
Timing was perfect.
Just before Anzac Day.
Stoking that kind of nationalist, militaristic fervour.
Correct.
Yeah.
Except it seems to have not really landed from what I can tell.
Yeah.
However, most notably, Gina Reinhardt at the Anzac Day Eve ceremony at the Opera House got up and spoke about Australia's need to increase defence spending.
Ah, of course.
Gets better.
Yeah.
So at the moment, we're at about, I think, 2%. It's $59 billion a year.
Yep.
Labor want to increase it 2.5%. It's about $79 billion a year.
Yep.
The Coalition have said, screw that. Let's go to, say, 3% in the next decade.
Just go for it.
Just go for it.
Just send it.
But 3% isn't enough. Gina Reinhardt thinks we should go to 5% of GDP.
Does she?
Yeah.
Wow.
And what's really fascinating about this...
Is she going to be paying? She obviously won't be paying.
She won't be paying.
Yeah.
But, for example, the US,
Yeah.
most notably Trump, has said to all NATO allies and allies, including Australia, that you need to be spending 3% of GDP. We're not going to provide that military defence for you anymore. She thinks that's not enough. She thinks Trump's policies are just not radical enough. She wants to go to 5%.
5%, wow.
And I do like these moments where you get like Australia's favourite like mining mogul.
Yes.
Or like an Australian like true oligarch getting up and basically dictating like Australia's national policies.
Absolutely.
It's really good.
And obviously, look, a more, shall we say, aggressive military posture in the region, say, if we actually started projecting power out into our kind of weaker, Pacific Island neighbours, for example, and we started annexing a few Indonesian islands, perhaps, or Papua New Guinea or something like that, throw back to the old days, obviously her mining interests would be the primary benefactors.
That's right.
So she'll be making a lot more money and we'll be spending a lot more money for her to make a lot more money.
Correct.
Would it be more efficient for her to just employ her own private army?
Well, it could be. Yes, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
I was thinking she should just fund most of the defence spending anyway.
I think she could do that.
Yeah.
You know what I'd actually like to see? The lady herself in combat fatigues
on the front
with
line.
a rifle on the front lines. Yeah. If she's that passionate about it, I think she should be willing to just grab the bull by the horns, mate.
Okay. So, Michael Pascoe from Michael West has put the figure that the Coalition want to increase spending to about $130 billion a year. Mm-hmm. So that's at 3%. If we are to take Gina Reinhardt seriously and increase to 5% of spending, that would be what, $300 billion a year? So that's about as much as what the Russians spend on their military, I'm pretty sure.
I'd imagine ours would be far less efficient, funnily enough, as well.
But if we're going to spend that money, can we at least annex New Zealand? If we're going to start spending $300 billion a year?
At the bare minimum, honestly, they've been free for too long.
They have been.
They've been free for too long.
And they're our long-lost cousins. We just need to bring them back into the greater Australian empire. And I totally agree on that.
We're the big kangaroo and they're the little Joey, and it's like, come back to the pouch. Come on.
Yeah. But so as Michael Pascoe from Michael West has pointed out, is that neither party really has any kind of like overall strategy as to what to do with the spending. Mm-hmm. So the Coalition just put these numbers forward. They say $20 billion. They haven't said what they're going to spend it on.
Yeah.
There's no strategy behind the money.
They're going to be increasing manufacturing infrastructure for defence spending.
No, they've just said we're going to get more F-35 fighter jets.
Yeah.
They said we're going to get another squadrons. We have almost 100 of them, which is great, here in an isolated landmass.
Yeah.
We're just going to have a bunch of fighter jets
Yeah.
boosting around.
Yeah, of course. So just throwing money at the Americans.
That's exactly
But that's
right.
good. That's a way to get support from the Seppos as well for your
Correct.
party.
He has said how he's going to fund it, which is interesting. He is going to scrap the Labor Party's tax cuts,
Oh, yes.
which every Australian will get.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. The Liberal Party want to scrap tax cuts.
No, of course not, Geordie.
Yeah, and
I thought they were all about giving everyone tax cuts.
no, and they're
Or
not
was that
going
wrong?
to. No, you are wrong. They're not going to go ahead also with Labor's 20% reduction in HEC stats.
Ah, yeah. Well,
So
that's no surprise.
They'll
there,
use
really.
this obviously to just throw money at the military-industrial complex, which should be obviously great for Australians.
Cool. That's sick. Dude, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, but no, it does highlight both parties don't really have any kind of sort of. It's not a defence policy. It's just an announcement we're going to spend more money.
It's more, I guess, like a tool for the election, shall we say.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
It's just a tool for the election. Obviously, the timing is really good right before Anzac Day. Say you're going to spend another $20 billion and try and wedge the Labor Party on defence spending and national security.
And well, I guess, and overall, the overall effect of that in the two-party system is that it pushes the whole sphere of conversation into a more militaristic kind of realm. Because obviously the coalition will always want to spear Labor on saying you're tough, you're crap on national security, crap on China. Then Labor will have to say, oh, no, we're actually going to spend more and be more hawkish and more militaristic.
Yeah.
Which then, of course, it continually keeps pushing it in one direction.
That's right.
Yeah.
And as I said, Labor already are going to increase spending to 2.3, 2.5%. They've allocated, I think, 10 or 20 billion over the next 10 years anyway. So like it's already going in that direction. The coalition just want to turbocharge that and just try and, as you said, wedge them into this corner.
Yep.
And you're completely right. Once these announcements are made, once this becomes a concrete policy, they never retract. There's never a reversal.
No, of course.
Neither of the two parties are going to stand up and go, let's decrease military spending back to...
yeah, back to what it was before. Absolutely, yeah. And that also as well comes on, there was a bit of a national security hoax, shall we say, that was whipped up recently, I might have seen.
Was.
Yeah.
So that's a perfect segue.
I'm here for, mate, yeah.
So this happened prior to the announcement of defence increase spending.
Yeah.
So this came about after a defence news website called Jane's reported that Russia had sent a request to Indonesia to station aircraft in Papua, just north of Australia. And as you can imagine, Peter Dutton used this news to attack the government on national security.
Yep.
So he came out and attacked the government saying, quote, "This has been a catastrophic failure. If they had not received notice of the request prior to it being publicly announced by the president of Indonesia." Strong words.
Yes, very strong.
However, what came out basically immediately was that it turned out that the Indonesian president, Prabowo Subianto, had made no such statement. And then Dutton began to backtrack his comments, saying that it was reference to the Indonesian government sources mentioned in the Jane Defence Report.
Of course.
So...
there was never any Russians in Indonesia.
No, there were Russians in Indonesia.
Okay, yeah.
No military craft stations.
Yeah, we've got Russian tourists in Bali.
Russian tourists in Bali. No, but I think what happened was that the intelligence caught whiff that there were discussions. At the start of the year, Russia held joint military exercises with Indonesia.
Yeah.
And so I think there may have been, I'm not 100% sure if I can confirm this, there was an official request, or the Russians said to the Indonesians, we'd like to station aircraft in the future. The Indonesians denied that.
Yeah.
But what was interesting is that Peter Dutton said that this had been an official remark by the Indonesian president.
Yeah.
Except that never happened.
Oh,
in
of
the
course.
first place. Yeah.
So classic Peter Dutton, just something conjuring up something that doesn't exist.
That's exactly right. Also, I read another really fascinating report, and it was talking about it really shows how Australia is so desperate to remain like a significant power.
Remain relevant.
And remain relevant. Because first of all, Indonesia's just become a member of the BRICS. It's going to be the 5th largest economy in the next decade.
Yeah, I think it's 4th biggest population. Or
280 million, 300 million.
Largest Muslim population on Earth.
Correct.
Yeah.
They've always notoriously remained independent and neutral.
Yes.
So they've never really got into the kind of defence blocks and Cold War rhetoric that obviously we love to do. Notably, when
post, say, 1960s, shall we say,
but
in the modern post-Cold War era.
Yeah, but when Prabowo was inaugurated last year in October, notably Anthony Albanese did not go to the ceremony.
Yeah.
If Dutton gets elected, he said the first country that he'll go and visit is the United States.
Yeah.
So we sort of completely disregard Indonesia as our as potentially an ally and also our biggest neighbour.
Yes.
And then at the same time kind of lament them and attack them when they want to talk security and weapons deals with other major countries.
Absolutely. And Indonesia, I think, like geographically, they're a lot more vulnerable than Australia is, for example. They're an archipelago of however many thousands of islands.
Yeah.
And that was, I know, for example, Paul Keating, one of his kind of main diplomacy like staples that he initiated was he had a bilateral security and defence agreement with Indonesia under Suharto. Now, say what you will about Suharto, he was probably a terrible, terrible person, but there was also a practical reality to recognise, well, they're our biggest neighbour. The only way we can truly be secure is by keeping them on side, essentially, and having something mutually beneficial that works for us.
Yeah.
I do think we are while we're on the subject, I do think we are neglecting Indonesia a lot, purely because I don't think it's in our interest to see Indonesia develop.
No,
I think
it's definitely
for Australian capital and Australian kind of imperial ambitions, it suits us if Indonesia remains underdeveloped, remains poor. Obviously, we can use it as a source of cheap labour, cheap commodities, cheap materials, and we'll also never have to face like a military threat from Indonesia.
Yeah.
However, doing that's that same kind of imperial mindset that will inevitably blow back onto you, because Indonesia, as we've said, is set to become one of the biggest economies in the world, geographically very significant.
No, definitely.
I think the key to our security is in that archipelago.
I think you're right. I think the Australian political class is very ignorant of this development as well. And I think,
absolutely. I think they probably still get like Indonesia and Malaysia confused. You know what I mean? Like, seriously, like, how much are they thinking about it?
No, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So that happened at the same time. Bridget McKenzie, who's a Victorian senator, a member of the Nationals Party, she came out on the ABC, and I thought this was absolutely hilarious. That she was, quote, saying that the defense minister of Russia and the Chinese leader have both made public comments that they do not want to see Peter Dutton as the prime minister of our country. She went on to argue that there's two world leaders who don't want to see Peter Dutton become prime minister of our country. That's Russia and that's China. What's also hilarious, once again, no official quote from either government.
Really? Yes.
There's nothing on the record of neither the Chinese or the Russians saying they don't want Peter Dutton as Prime Minister or they want Albo. Yeah. However, I thought about this.
Pragmatically, they probably wouldn't want Peter Dutton.
No, and this is what
it's Australia. It's none of their business.
It's none of their business, none of their interest. But I sat there and thought about it. I was like, don't you want major powers to look favourably upon the leader of your country?
Absolutely.
And think of them as a statesman and think of them as someone that they can negotiate and interact in? Yes. Do you know what I mean? And she's sitting there saying, like, neither of, like, the two, like, major countries, China and Russia, want Peter Dutton as our Prime Minister. And I'm just sitting there, I'm like, there's a bit of cognitive dissonance here. Do you not understand that, like, that's not advertising for Peter Dutton?
Absolutely. And the best part is as well, one of his whole kind of shticks is that, like, Anthony Albanese's a weak leader. You know, I'll be far better on the international stage, for example. Yeah. And it's like, well, you probably wouldn't, dude, to be honest. You probably wouldn't. You'd probably rim Trump, rim Netanyahu relentlessly, but it's not going to do anything for Australia in the long run.
Yeah.
And we're then a lot closer to China.
Yeah, that's right. And in the leaders' debate, which I imagine you didn't watch, I managed to sit through it.
Yeah, no, I was hibernating, like we said.
David Spears from the ABC, and I'll give credit where credit is due, notoriously a bit of a Murdoch hack, did kind of stick it to both leaders quite well, I thought quite evenly. Mm-hmm. And he did press both of them on our relationship with the US and with Trump, and whether we would seek, I guess, kind of to engage the United States. Mm. And Anthony Albanese said, the United States is our major ally. I'm obviously going to negotiate and talk with Trump. I thought, okay, that's not too bad. But that was fascinating. Dutton replied and turned around and said to him, well, I don't really know Trump. And I was like, you have been modelling your entire personality, the entire political campaign off Trump.
Of course,
and then ever since the tariffs hit the wall and suddenly Trump started to look like a complete and utter lunatic, he's just been slowly kind of like backstepping the whole time.
He has. And it's much to his own detriment as well.
That's right.
Really, because I think one of the good things about Trump coming into power is that it has severely hurt Dutton's electoral chances as
Yeah,
well.
and Dave Spears also asked Pete Dutton, I think along the similar lines of what do you think of Xi Jinping, et cetera, et cetera. And he turned around and said the same thing. He's like, I don't really know the guy. It's like, well, at any other time, you would get up and attack the leader of the Chinese government, no matter what. So,
well, that's interesting. Well, at least he's being honest.
He is being incredibly honest.
That's probably the most honest thing he said the entire time, I think.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Good on him.
So those two instances really stood out to me, obviously. More recently, just last week, we had some interesting news come out as well, is that for the first time in 30 years, the relationship between the Coalition and One Nation has been cemented.
Oh, really?
So some how-to vote cards were given out.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's now early voting, postal voting is now open. And what happened was, you, for the first time, are able to see which party on their how-to vote cards, what they suggest to put as your preference.
Yep.
So One Nation, for the first time, have now preferenced the Coalition in second place.
So I always thought they were always kind of on side with Coalition.
No, I think it's from election to election, it's varied.
Yeah.
However, they've always said that, oh no, we're going to give our preferences to conservative independents or like, what was it? It was like freedom parties or something like that.
Of course, yeah.
But what was interesting is the first lot of how to vote cards that were printed had the Coalition put us fourth as like last. And then at the last minute, they reprinted them.
This is One Nation's how to vote cards.
This is One Nation's how to vote cards. And then they changed them at the last minute.
So now they're second, I'm assuming.
And now they're second. Ooh. And so in the seat of Dixon, which is Pete Dutton's seat, which he is going to hold on to most likely, but apparently it's been quite quite a tight contest.
Yeah.
They had him as fourth originally, and they reprinted the tickets and put him as second.
Spicy. So
there's definitely been some like behind the doors discussions.
Yeah,
about this.
I'd imagine there would be, and I'd imagine, for example, the Liberal Party power brokers, as their chances, as the polls are kind of showing that they are going to be less and less favoured to win, they're going to be trying to cover all bases, make all sorts of dirty, backroom deals with all the other, all the other conservative and kind of independent parties as well.
They saw their primary vote slipping, and they're like, "All right, just ring her up.
Yeah, ring up Pauline.
Ring up Pauline. It's been 30 years. Make a deal with her."
Dude, you know what? All things considered, Pauline has occasionally done a couple good things. She has backed unions.
No, that's true.
She did stop the Morrison omnibus bill.
That's true.
So I'm going to ignore her like 3 decades of like racism.
Yeah, that's true.
She has, and the one time she blocked an omnibus bill in Parliament to destroy unions. I thought, good on you, Pauline.
Good on you, Pauline.
Good on you, love.
But being xenophobic only gets you so far. It's not very fleshed out. It's not. It's not a party platform. You know what I mean?
Not, dude, as my mum's told me, it's like the same rhetoric for like 30 years. First of all, it was like
the Asians.
It was like Asian immigrants, and then it was Aboriginals.
Post 9/11 Muslims.
Post 9/11 Muslims, and it's like, I see. I wonder who shall be next. Horrible, cheap, crappy politics, but that's what we have to deal with.
No, because I think this also came about because Trumpet of Patriots. Apparently on their cards, their preferences were for Till independence because they said that they were going to put every major party incumbent, Labor or Liberal, last.
Wow.
So that's their kind of ideological stance.
Yeah.
And if you've read any of the...
so they have one. All right,
if you've read any of the national newspapers here in Australia, your eyes would be seared by just like bright yellow, full-page advertisements.
Yes.
I was going to get some of them up and discuss them on the podcast, but I just thought I'd kind of save us the...
Save us the pain.
I
think we've already seen enough of them, and I think the public's already been subjected to enough of them.
Yeah, that's
we don't need to do that to ourselves.
That's exactly right. But obviously, their entire stick is just like, we need to end the duopoly.
Yeah.
And then they kind of like reached out, they called out to Labor and Liberal MPs and like, come join the Trumpet of Patriots, abandon the duopoly. And it's like, okay.
Yeah.
But they were so ideologically committed to putting Labor and Liberal last that in some seats they had to put the Till independence as their second preference.
You'd think that'd be the mortal enemy of the Trumpet of Patriots, wouldn't it?
You'd think so. But because of this, that also, I think, spurred on One Nation and the Coalition to make this deal because they're so worried about like the Tills gaining more traction in seats.
To be honest, I'd feel that One Nation be probably a slightly better prospect than Trumpet of Patriots.
I think
they do have a bit of an actual base.
Well, yeah, I think they get like 7% or something.
Yeah, they do get a couple. Like they always win a seat. There's always a couple of seats. Whereas Trumpet of Patriots or U8, whatever iteration of Clive Palmer's imagination, he pulls out every cycle. They doesn't seem to do much.
No, but what was funny once again, massive backturn last minute, is that Clive Palmer came out and apparently said that the Trumpeter Patriots electoral campaign had been hacked.
Oh, no.
And these how-to vote cards weren't like officially sanctioned.
Of course.
And so they're like, no, don't vote for any. They're like, don't vote for any till independence. And I was just like, dude, last minute scandal. This is so good. I'm loving this.
The one thing about Trumpeter Patriots, though, Geordie,
Yeah.
is that I always get the impression that it's just not well thought through. Like, they've obviously got a lot of money behind them, but there's nothing really substantial. Yeah, it's like a dog with all bark, no bite. There's actually nothing substantial to the policies. There's even nothing substantial to the advertising. Like, you think with a huge advertising budget like that, you could at least think up of something, have a strategy that's slightly more sophisticated, as opposed to just having billboards of Clive Palmer with like Tucker Carlson just, you know, like on every major road in Australia. You'd think you'd be able to actually formulate something a bit more cunning, shall we say.
I was once talking to a colleague about politics. And this was back during the referendum, the Voice referendum. And his opinion was that if you throw enough money at any issue in politics, it'll fix it. And I disagreed with him, and I said, no, I don't. It's not really about money at the end of the day. It's actually about like policies and having like a political project. And it's like, how are we going to get from point A to point B?
And having money helps.
Having money helps, definitely. But it's also having those mechanisms, being able to use the political institutions, and being also like a savvy, like not just politician, the individual, but the actual party. Having the party kind of like mechanism behind it to move.
Of course.
Curate and put forward policy.
So
I said to him, I was like, well, no, you can't just throw money at everything. And I think Clive Palmer and the Trumpeter Patriots are a perfect example of that.
I hope they run next election. So I'd love to see what they're going to be called, like what they're going to be rebirthed as.
What they'll be rebirthed as,
And if Clive Palmer will still be alive.
That's true.
What his policies will be. It'll just be like, subsidised shepherd's pies for everyone, because Clive Palmer loves shepherd's. You know what I mean? It would just be something like that, subsidised chocolate. So, subsidised fucking pork ribs or something. Sorry.
No, it's okay. So, look, those instances over the past fortnight, I found quite funny.
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
Alarming in some ways. However, a week out from the election, I do think that the ALP will probably get over the line.
You think minority?
Most likely a minority government. That's what it is sort of looking like. However, I do have to say, I was going through and I was kind of, on the ABC, they've summarised all the policies and just put forwards kind of, okay, this is what the coalition, this is what the Labor Party putting forwards, and say health, cost of living, housing, etc., etc. I was going through them, reading them, and look, I will be honest, it did make me happy that I live in Australia.
Oh, yeah, dude.
Like, compared to, for example, the United Kingdom.
Or the US.
Or the US. Have to admit, I was looking at them and like, look, we do have a lot of, I personally, we both do disagree with both major parties on a lot of things.
Very critical,
I would more say, obviously, the coalition are easy to make fun of because they just have these complete and utter just deranged psychopaths within them. So it's easy to make fun of them. However, when you go and actually look at the major policies of both parties, they both, in a lot of key areas, are putting forward something.
Yes.
So I thought that was kind of, like, for example, in mental health, even in, for example, in supermarket legislation. So Labor's going to make it illegal for supermarkets to price gouge customers. The coalition will legislate break-up powers to kind of intimidate the big, the duopoly that Coles and Woolworths obviously have. So I looked at that and I was like, well, at least that's good. Do you know what I mean? At least both parties are kind of contributing something.
And they have been driven by the demand of the electorate as well. And I think that's one good thing as well. We're talking about the force towards further funding of militarisation. The same works in reverse. You know what I mean? So, for example, if the coalition have to match a welfare policy put forwards by Labor, then they'll do it, and that'll push that spectrum across in that direction further, obviously, which is good because it brings awareness. And obviously it's a lot different from like the US where like what are the Dems or the Republicans actually run on? There's no one's talking about childcare. You know what I mean? Or tax breaks for everyone, or funding to education. You know what I mean? It's just a lot more rhetorical and a lot less substantive.
For sure. Notable, I did see, well, I noticed.
Sorry for all our comrades over in the US and in the UK, you poor bastards.
One thing,
it's getting hard.
There was an area though that was largely overlooked this federal election on the campaign leading up to it. And it was an area that I think is quite important, and it was really significant in the last election. Do you have any idea what that might have been?
Fill me in, my friend.
climate change.
Ooh.
I don't know if you've
We've
realized.
just forgotten about climate change, haven't we?
Yeah, well, we have forgotten about it. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
The climate hasn't forgotten about us.
No, the climate's not changing. Yeah.
No, really interesting though is that basically, so on climate, the only thing and energy is that Labor promised was the $150 rebate on power bills. There was no real discussion about climate change.
Yeah.
In the leaders' debates, Dutton was pressed on his opinion on climate change, and he said he'll leave that up to climate scientists. He doesn't really have strong opinions. Which, look, what else were you going to say?
Yeah.
I guess they were trying to
You can't say climate change is not real. And
No.
You can't say it's real because you screw yourself either way.
No, and he's
don't
in
you?
a really tight position because
Yeah.
if he obviously denies climate change, he opens up to more attack from the emerging Teals independents.
Yeah, from kind of the wet, more liberal conservatives.
That's
shall we
right.
say.
And then on the other side, to the right of him, he has everyone that doesn't believe in climate change.
Yeah,
so,
of course.
There wasn't a great deal on climate change
No,
whatsoever.
that is right, actually. You're correct.
Whatsoever.
yeah.
And last week, Labor confirmed that there's going to be another offshore gas exploration off the Northern Territory. So that's going ahead, which is no big surprise whatsoever.
Yeah.
The other two things, this is my final wrap up, which I thought was interesting, was both the parties' stance on migration. So Labor says it will announce its migration policies closer to the election, which will be in line with its stated goal of bringing migration under control. Basically, I think they're just going to kind of go ahead with what has previously been happening, like the standard targets of immigration. And the coalition, regardless of their mantra of saying that Labor's let in 1 million people over the past 5 years, etc., is that if elected, the coalition would reduce the annual intake of permanent migrants from 180 to 140, but then every year increase it by another 10,000, back up to 160.
Back up, yeah.
So neither party wants to change this, and that's because fundamentally our current economic system relies so much on internal consumption and internal growth.
Of course,
we need
yeah.
more people in the country to buy things.
Operate the service sector.
Yeah. We need more skilled migrants to come into the country, and
Yeah.
we need more people to come and buy more homes and more produce from Coles and Woolworths.
Absolutely, yeah.
So there is a complete unanimous front from both parties on that.
Yeah.
And on housing policy, both major parties don't really want to touch it. They don't want to really address housing prices or
Yeah.
the housing crisis.
Yeah. Well, I think from what I've kind of seen is that I think Labor's a bit more inclined to, obviously neither party can bring the housing prices down.
No, they cannot.
However, you can make it more feasible for someone to buy a house, whether that's subsidising things like childcare,
Yep.
Medicare, wage increases, so you actually have more of your income to put towards housing.
Correct. That's exactly right. So Labor are going to make it a lot easier for first home buyers. So I think they're going to have a 3% minimum
Yep.
deposit now,
Yep.
which basically means that the Labor Party is going to guarantee the other 15% of the deposit.
Oh, wow.
So it's not going to cost a lot of money for them.
Yeah.
The coalition have come out and said that people that have a deposit for the first 5 years, if you're a first home buyer, you'll be able to ride that off on your tax, which is incredible.
That is incredible.
But that means you'd have to have the money for the deposit anyway.
Yeah, of course.
So it's really only going to serve people that have $150,000
Dude, that
for a deposit.
Crush the tax base. Absolutely destroy the tax base. Are you kidding?
Well, as Alan Coa from the ABC said, it's just a really regressive housing policy.
Absolutely, yeah.
Really regressive because it's going to benefit people that have $150,000, $200,000,
Yeah.
and then it's going to eat into the
And housing prices are going to go up.
Yeah, that's
exponentially.
yeah.
You can write off all your mortgage repayments on tax.
Yeah.
Amazing. Wow.
absolutely incredible.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think Peter Dutton's, he bought his son out
Yeah.
to talk about the housing crisis, and his son, I think it's what, like 19 or
Harry,
20
yeah.
or something. Yeah,
Yeah.
probably looks like a nice lad, and he was just like, yeah, look, like, it's really hard, I'm saving all my money, but, like, I don't think I'll ever be able to get ahead and buy a house. He's sitting next to his dad, who's a property investor, who's had we did a segment on this a couple of weeks ago. It's worth $300 million,
Yeah.
bought and sold dozens of properties in his lifetime. And it's like, you actually missed the mark for both audiences for that one.
He did.
Because you come across as an asshole who's not helping your kid out, and you also come across as someone that's ineffective at delivering a housing policy. You know,
sure.
so you failed on both fronts
Yeah.
on that one, my friend.
But he's not lying.
He's not lying.
No. On his income, I doubt he could afford to save for a house
Harry.
deposit. Yeah, Harry. I doubt he
of
could.
course, yeah.
But he doesn't need to. That's the whole point. He can just jump into his dad's portfolio.
Absolutely, yes.
he
As
will.
I would. I mean, I'd do that if I was him.
Yeah,
for sure.
100%. And the coalition they are going to allow people to access $50,000 of their super, which is not really great.
That's not great.
Because over 30 years, that will cost your super retirement fund up to $500,000.
That is insane. And I guess that comes back into that whole liberal kind of strategy of slowly destroy super. You know, so your retirement should be based on your assets, which isn't your super fund.
That's right.
But it's your house, which you've invested in. So then you can obviously sell the house, retire on that.
Yep.
But then obviously, even if you don't have a house, the weaker super is, the more insecure your work is, the poorer you're going to be when you're older, the more likely you will work for longer, for example, for lower wages.
Yep.
And just, I think that's an attack on the working class, personally.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So both policies aren't going to actually address supply.
No.
In fact, they're just going to increase demand. They're just going to say it's easier for you to go and get a mortgage,
Yeah.
and they're going to keep housing prices where they are, if not going upwards. So
Well, I've got a lot to look forward to.
you do have a lot to look forward to. One last little thing, and I did notice, this was really fascinating, just while we're discussing housing before closing up. They were talking about what's going on with apprenticeships in Australia. Because they were talking about back when you were an apprentice, say, 30 years ago, and when you were on, say, it was like, it was a couple $100 a week. It was like $150 a week.
Yeah,
And they were
like $5 an hour or something.
Yeah,
like that.
it wasn't very much at all. But what they were saying is back then you lived with your parents and you didn't actually have to own a car. A lot of the time is you were able to catch transport and things like that for your apprenticeship. And just looking at some of the statistics, so in the past year, there's been a national drop of 7.8% of people getting into apprenticeships and trades.
That's not good. As
No.
a tradesman myself, I can say that's, not great at all.
No, not whatsoever.
Yeah.
So they were saying at the same time, as there is no increase in supply of housing, less and less people are getting into trades to actually build housing, and that more people that are getting into trades are just going into the mining sector.
Of course. Well, that's where the big money is, isn't it?
That's right. So that's why both parties they're kind of forced to have to look at skilled migration.
Exactly, of course.
So-
But then that also feeds into that standard right-wing narrative of they're taking our jobs.
That's right,
But we're
yeah.
going to make it harder for you to have kids, raise kids,
Yeah.
educate them, give them tertiary,
Yeah. Yeah.
and have like meaningful work for them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we hate immigrants. So it's like an Ouroboros, isn't it? It just
Yeah.
feeds itself, that strategy.
However, and I thought was significant because we have both done trades, is that both parties were promising to put money into apprenticeships. Labor said that they were going to contribute $10,000 to each apprenticeship, and the Coalition was going to contribute $12,000. Except you know what the difference was?
Yeah.
The $10,000 was going to go to the worker, and guess where the $12,000 promised by the Coalition was going?
The business. Once again. Can you imagine, dude? Can you imagine the exploitation of young Aussies that would happen if each business got $12,000? You'd have businesses hiring 16 apprentices for a month at a time
And then
each
firing
and
them,
just writing them off.
Yeah.
Absolute penury.
All right. Well, that's my wrap up.
Thanks for that comprehensive election update, mate. I guess we will. It's in a week's time.
Yeah, 6 days.
If anything pops up, we will be sure to cover it.
Yeah.
And once it's over, you'll hear all about it from us and our hot takes.
That's it. All right. Thanks, James.
Enjoy, mate.
See
Like,
ya.
comment, subscribe. Mwah.